We have achieved great things. We have made giant leaps. We've gone far beyond what we thought was possible. But we have only just begun. Our future in space is unlimited, and it will benefit all humanity. But it will take hard work, new technologies, advanced financing models, and enabling public policy. The Beyond Earth Institute is creating a policy and legal framework to enable the creation of economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. We will engage all stakeholders on critical policy issues: property rights in space, norms of behavior, conflict resolution protocols, filling the technology gaps, exploring new financing mechanisms, and making space settlement an agreed goal of the U.S. and its allies. Beyond Earth is committed to the true purpose of why we go to space. Join us on this journey.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Steve Wolf. I'm the president of the Beyond Earth Institute, and welcome to this webinar today on titled "Making It in Space: The Market Potential for Commercial Space Stations and its long-term implications." We've got a tremendous panel and tremendous discussion ahead. We have over 200 people who have registered for this program, so clearly there's an extreme interest in this topic, because ultimately if we're not able to fill the proposed commercial space stations and the ones that follow them with customers, finding those killer apps, we're not going to be able to have the sustainable market in LEO for commercial space habitats. I want to start though by recognizing our sponsor today, and that is, of course, the ISS, or the International Space Station National Lab, Center for Advancement in Science and Space. The ISS National Lab manages the ISS as a public service in order to benefit the U.S. taxpayer and to foster a scalable and sustainable low Earth orbit economy. So we are very, very thankful for their participation today. So now for today's program on the market potential for commercial space stations. This is a continuation of what the Beyond Earth Institute has been doing. Last year, we held a webinar on this. It was a centerpiece of one of our major sessions during our fall space symposium, the Beyond Earth Symposium in Washington, where we mainly were including those individuals who were part of the habitat or the space station design folks, Voyager, Axiom, and so forth. But in this session, we want to look at who is going to be using those facilities and what is that market potential. We did do a study. We did do a paper on the subject, which actually during the call I will be posting in the chat field for you. I really can't overstate this enough, that the success of the CLD program, and more broadly for commercial space stations, they cannot fail, right? It's really important because they represent the underpinning of all that will come after that in terms of human expansion, ultimately to the cislunar environment and beyond. What's going on here with this community as we transition from the ISS to the commercial stations is really critical. NASA plays an important part in that, in being in it for the long term. With the commercial sector, they also play an important part of identifying those killer apps, making sure that we develop those markets. It's not going to be an easy task, and hopefully we'll chip away a little bit at this topic today. But I now want to introduce our moderator, Courtney Stad, who serves as the Beyond Earth Executive Vice President. Most people know Courtney. If you don't, you should. Courtney has been a pillar of support for the Beyond Earth Institute since he came into our circle about 2 years ago. I will have to admit that much of what you've been able to accomplish since then would not simply have been possible without his participation. So thank you so much, Courtney. For nearly 40 years, Courtney's career path has been a mixture of government and private sector engagement. He's been focused primarily on the removal of policy and regulatory barriers to the emergence of a competitive American-led commercial space marketplace. He has held senior level positions at Commerce, at Transportation, the White House, the National Space Council, and he worked directly for 3 NASA administrators as Chief of Staff and White House liaison. So with that, Courtney, I'm going to turn the program over to your very extremely able hands to carry us forward. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. By the way, I'll make sure everything, you can see the picture, hear my voice.
You look good.
Terrific. Okay. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I appreciate it. And I do want to thank everyone out there who's taking time to sign up and listen to this. But I think it's an important, timely conversation today. The format is simple. I'm going to make some intros very quickly for our distinguished panelists. I have a couple of very quick comments, and we'll start off with a few minutes, allowing each of the panelists to hold forth with some initial observations, and then we'll get into the meat of the matter. And that will run approximately 45 minutes or so, roughly. And then, of course, we'll open up to Q&A. And I'm hoping also that Dr. Mike Roberts, Chief Scientific Officer, PhD microbiology at ISS National Lab, will have a moment or two when we're done with the formal part with the panel to step up and make some comments as well. Let me start with our distinguished panel. I don't know about the rest of you out there, but often, with all due respect to the conferences and the speakers and so forth, there's a lot of hand waving that goes on in our domain. We get it, that we're all passionate regarding space, but what I am particularly happy about this gathering of panelists is we're all very much practitioners. These are people that block and tackle every single day to get points on the board in terms of advancing the marketplace for commercial space station related markets. Phil McAllister is currently Director of Commercial Spaceflight Division at NASA headquarters. I've known him for decades. He's that rarest of government officials. I call him a true warrior who's not afraid to challenge the status quo in the name of a better deal for us, the taxpayer. And any large space program over the years whose prefix has commercial is sure to have Phil as a major architect in one form or another. So we're really grateful to have him as our speaker today. Olivia Gemez-Hozhoz is the founder and CEO for Rhodium Scientific, and she's been on the front lines of advancing the company's biotech commercialization strategies, particularly in the low Earth orbit LEO economy. Brings decades of experience to managing science, engineering, quality assurance strategies at Rhodium Scientific to, and I quote, ensure discoveries made in microgravity, and I emphasize, translate into products utilized by the regulated consumer, manufacturing, and life science industries, end quote. Again, perfect person to have for this discussion. Tom Shelley is president of Space Adventures and the only company to date to have arranged for self-funded private citizens to fly to space. Tom brings years of practical block and tackle marketing experience to today's discussion. And I love this stat. Space Adventure clients have spent a combined total of over 100 days on board the International Space Station and have traveled 35 million miles in space. Andrew Rush, known to so many of us, is the former president, COO of Redwire, former president, chief executive officer of the legendary Made in Space, which of course was acquired by Redwire. He has expanded that company's portfolio across three key sectors: satellite manufacturing, payload development and operations, deep space exploration solutions. And this operational integration resulted in, to date, 8 successful spaceflight missions with 4 facilities flown and operating on the International Space Station. And that statement really belies the fact that his additive manufacturing technology is nothing less than transformational, is nothing less than fundamental to our future in terms of commercial markets in space. And by the way, I had the pleasure of listening to his TED Talk this morning, and it is extraordinarily compelling. And maybe during the discussion, I'll try to put the link into the chat room if Andrew doesn't mind. It's really very, very inspiring. A couple of quick comments. You know, for those of us, I've been in this commercial space domain for 45 years or so. So I've seen a lot of waves and a lot of ups and downs. And frankly, I feel that we're really just at the very beginning. We've unleashed the genius of the entrepreneur, both here in the US and overseas. It's beginning to blossom. People like Phil are marshaling our tax dollars in a way to help leverage and ensure that that the government is benefiting, the American people are benefiting, but he's also laying the groundwork for advancing the commercial world. And of course, he's hoping, as you will hear him no doubt hold forth, that through the good work of Olivia and others, that we move into a non-government dependent marketplace. We're just at the beginning. And a reminder to all of you that when you talk about these major industrial transformations, you're talking decades. Internet started with the ARPANET, funded by the government in the 60s. It took years to get the worldwide web as we understand it, with the protocols, TCP, IP, so forth in place. It took a number of years for various commercial search services to come into being, a lot of failures along the way, and the age of Google suddenly happened. So keep in mind that, please, that although with the advent of various commercial launch companies, SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and others, the costs are beginning to come down. It's still very costly, still very challenging to climb your way out of this gravity well and establish a sustaining presence in low Earth orbit. But those of us here at Beyond Earth, when we look at it in multi-decades and generational, remain extraordinarily hopeful that if history is any guide, that humanity has the ingenuity to leverage those incredible resources in microgravity and so forth that will be made available through the genius, again, of both the government and industry working together and beyond. So I'm also going to insert a link into the chat, a NASA link that Greg Autry, Professor Autry, who's on our advisory committee, brought to my attention, which has several very intriguing papers that look at potential so-called killer app opportunities in space. So I'll make that available to you. You know, from the promotion for this webinar, the main questions looking at economic growth curve for commercial space stations, what apps may be the most likely opportunities for profits for habitat operators. If history is any guide, most of us will probably be wrong about that, but doesn't mean that we can't at least attempt to make some forecast. And of course, there's been some concern as the International Space Station, that incredible, mind-boggling engineering marvel, enters its end stage in roughly 2030 is the end date at this point. What about that transition? And are we doing everything we can in terms of planning for that transition? And obviously, that'll be a key question. So with that, let me now turn to all of you. And if I may, I'll start with Phil. And again, just a few moments of your observations and maybe talk a moment about your experience and expertise that's relevant to today's discussion. So with that, Phil, turn to you.
Will do. Thanks, Courtney, for that introduction, and welcome everybody. Thanks for coming and listening to us talk. A lot of people sort of ask me what my job is at NASA, Director of Commercial Space. It doesn't really, it's not really descriptive. So I asked our Office of Communications to put together a short very short video that sort of talks about the things that I oversee at NASA and kind of my vision for where we're trying to go with the things that we're doing at NASA. So Cody, if you could tee that up, I'd appreciate it.
NASA will be one of many investors of commercial development, opening space to more people, more companies, and more ideas. An orbital economy inspires new opportunities for commercial partners to enable research, commerce, and unique experiences. NASA's Commercial Crew and Cargo partnerships launched this path to incorporating space into our economic sphere, from NASA's 2 decades of continuous human presence in space. Private space flights enabling more types of people to visit space. Innovation in commercial space stations, powering technological advancements that benefit our daily lives. Low Earth orbit transportation and destinations in the hands of the private sector frees NASA resources for human exploration to the moon and beyond.
All right. Thank you, Cody. I appreciate that. Okay, so right now, most of my focus is on commercial LEO destinations, although I still oversee the Commercial Crew program. So Go Crew 6, which is on orbit right now, had a very good mission. I appreciate what was said earlier, that CLDs cannot fail. That's all I think about, is how they can fail. So there's absolutely no pressure when I hear they cannot fail. But that is what's occupying my time. I do want to say, though, my views that I'm expressing today are kind of my personal views as Phil McAllister, private citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of NASA or making any sort of policy judgments or statements regarding the administration or the administrator. I'll leave that up to them. So this is sort of my view on how things are going and how I see this shaking out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the CLD program, and then we'll get into the market. So just to level set everybody, I do have some slides. I'm sorry, I'm from NASA. I have to have slides. Cody, if you could bring up my first chart, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully you can see that. What are U.S. government objectives and goals in LEO? I've got the statement from the NASA Authorization Act of 2017. The sense of the Congress that we need an orderly transition of human spaceflight activities in LEO away from a paradigm where it's mostly NASA to a paradigm where we are one of many customers. And then a couple statements from the current U.S. National Space Policy about continued human presence and also transitioning from the ISS to commercial platforms. And then that translates even further down to NASA's strategic plan, which has a goal. Second goal, develop a human spaceflight economy enabled by a commercial market. So the point that I want to make here is the luxury I have in this sort of unanimity and consistency of policy goals. We did not have that with Commercial Crew a decade ago. There was a lot of discussion, particularly here in DC, about how we do the future of human spaceflight. When it comes to destinations, we've got a pretty good consensus among the stakeholders that we want to maintain this continuous human presence. There's a general consensus that and observation that the ISS cannot remain in orbit forever, and that the next platform that the US has is going to be commercially owned and operated. That kind of consistency of policy does make my job a lot easier, I have to say, and makes me a little bit less worried. It's a policy goal to maintain continuous human presence. So I do believe we are going to figure out a way how to do this, because that is a goal of basically all of our stakeholders at this point. Next slide. So how are we going to accomplish this transition? I hope you guys have seen this slide before. It's sort of our top level acquisition strategy of how we are going to make this transition. We have got the International Space Station. It's up there operating very well and safely, and we have extended the lifetime of that to 2030. We're currently doing an assessment to see if the primary structure can go that long, but we don't see any showstoppers. So right now, ISS operations to 2030. The goal for the CLDs is to have one up there by the end of 2028. It doesn't have to be up there. I don't have to have this sort of 2-year transition that you see in the upper right-hand column, but we would like to have an overlap period. We don't think it's a good plan to turn off the lights on ISS one day and turn them on a CLD. We'd like to sort of phase this in. So that's the goal, and we're doing the sort of in 2 phases. The first phase, we've got 4 partners, as you can see in the left-hand side of the screen, Axiom Space with a concept that's going to attach to the International Space Station, add some modules, and then ultimately detach around the 2029 timeframe. And then we've got 3 Space Act agreements, one with Blue Origin, one with NanoRacks, and one with Northrop Grumman. They all have different concepts. They're all targeting different markets, which is very interesting, and they have different strategies on how they're going to finance it. So this early period, it's kind of, I don't want to call it a shakeout period, but it's a period of early design and development and early fundraising and earlier customer acquisition. And then we make, NASA's going to make a decision in the mid part of this decade as to who we are going to purchase services from. So we're going to have to certify that system as safe for our NASA astronauts, and then that same contract will be used to purchase services. And we hope by the latter part of that decade, this decade, we will be purchasing services from commercial space stations. So that's sort of the macro strategy. So now let's get into what we are all here to talk about, which is markets. The beginning of my human spaceflight journey primarily started about 20 years ago, almost exactly 20 years ago. When I look at the date of this document that we wrote, I was with a company called Futron Corporation. We got a very large contract from NASA. It was over $1 million, which was big for a consulting firm at that time. And if you remember, we were doing the Space Launch Initiative at that time, and it had a 2nd generation RLV as its keystone. And so we were hired to do a forecast of markets, primarily commercial markets, but also government markets for the next 20 years. And we put a lot of time and effort in that, and we analyzed 42 different markets. Everything that you can think of, the traditional telecommunications and direct-to-home broadcast, as well as remote sensing, and then every kind of market that anybody had ever even thought of, obviously space depots, billboards, and advertisings in space, orbital billboards. I'm looking at a few space agriculture, theme parks, just obviously protein crystal growth, just everything and anything. What we found was when we did all that, racked it all up, and we had a lot of people on the team that were not space people. These were business people. I deliberately got a couple people that thought the rest of us were crazy space people, right? So we wanted the cold water of business realism to be included into these forecasts. We looked at terrestrial alternatives, and what it turned out was demand looked fairly stable for the next 20 years. That's turned out to be the case just recently, when we've seen launch demand go way up because of these LEO constellations. But pretty much some markets went down a little bit, some went up, but at the macro level, it was pretty stable. So that was a little sobering. But what was really promising was the public space travel demand was, which you can see here, real and robust. And we started to see that was had a lot of potential. We contracted with the Zogby Corporation, and we did a survey of over 450 millionaires. I don't know how Zogby got that list, but they did. And we had interviews over the phone with them. They lasted approximately 30 minutes. So to get 30 minutes of 458 millionaires times was amazing. We had a little margin of error that we could calculate, but that's just a calculation. That doesn't really mean anything. But we obviously only surveyed Americans that could afford it, because if you ask me whether I want to go to space, it doesn't matter, because I'm not going to be able to afford it unless I win the lottery or I become friends with some millionaire. The respondents were also given a realistic description of space travel. It wasn't like, hey, do you want to go to space, which is super cool? Everybody says yes. But we described that, but we also said, hey, you're probably going to need to spend about 6 months training. You might get sick when you're up there. And when you come back, you're probably going to have a backache, stuff like that. So we described the experience, not just in positive terms, but what we thought was more realistic. And we obviously got answers that says, yes, I want to go to space after they heard the good stuff. And then when they heard the not so good stuff, went down a little bit. Well, we used the latter number, not the first number. And then we cross-referenced some of their other survey responses, like, okay, you're willing to spend 20 million for this kind of trip. How much have you spent in the past on like entertainment and adventure travel? And if they said, well, I went to Disney World once, we really decremented that respondents because it wasn't consistent with their past spending profiles. We also factored in health and a couple other factors. So I really feel like that survey really was probably the best capturing of demand for public space travel. And I wrote these words in this white paper: the demand for public space travel is real, it's robust, it's going to eventually make somebody very wealthy. And it was one of the few areas where growth can be predicted in the launch industry. So I became really interested and passionate about that. I really felt like to enable this, the government was going to need to support some of these efforts. And that's one of the reasons why I went to NASA. And then the Commercial Crew program came, and I couldn't believe my luck. And I was able to run Commercial Crew since its inception. And still
lucky
today.
us. Phil, I could hear you go on for much longer. If you could
wrap it up
shortly, that'd be great. And then we can come back
Sorry,
to you.
Courtney.
No, this is absolutely relevant. I'll be eager to hear Tom's reaction too to the some of the observations. Go ahead, Phil.
So next slide. This is my last slide, Courtney, and I'm sorry I took so much time.
No problem.
When I think of the killer app, I think we found it. Honestly, it's people. No disrespect to all the cool stuff that you're going to hear about from Olivia and Andrew and everybody else. And I love those markets, and I think some of them are really, really cool and can really develop into something large. I mean, when I look at it today, I think we're already seeing the killer app, which is people. This is a timeline of just 2.5 years since SpaceX got certified. I haven't included Crew 6 on here. This is 30 space travelers in the 2.5 years. So to go back to your point, Courtney, is this time, it takes a long time, but just in 2.5 years since SpaceX has had this capability, 30 travelers, 8 of them private citizens. So almost a third of the market is private. And when I look at this year, we're going to have our 2 commercial crew missions, but SpaceX could get 2 private astronaut missions. One's flying in about a month and a half. We've got one on the manifest for later this year, and they also want to fly the Polaris mission this year. So of the 5 missions, 3 of them, or 60% of the market, will be driven by private citizens. So that's really cool. Right now, the question is, what are they going to do? That's a great question. I don't think they're going to be satisfied just floating around like Dennis Tito was and listening to opera, but they are going to come up with cool things to do that we haven't even thought of. And I hope it's going to be this self-reinforcing cycle where more people go up. They want to keep coming up with new things to do attract more people. And it's going to be this hopefully self-fulfilling and self-reinforcing market. That's my personal view. Thank you. Sorry to go on.
Thank you. No, this is fabulous. Olivia, you're on.
Hi, thank you, Courtney, for the brilliant introduction, and Phil, thank you so much for your perspective. I'm pleasure to be here. So I'm founder and CEO of Rhodium Scientific, and we are one of a handful of the commercial services providers approved by NASA and the ISS National Lab, our sponsor, to facilitate biotech and life science and regenerative medicine topics on the International Space Station. So in the last couple of years, since we've had this commercial provider status, we've flown about 20 missions with rapid cadence to the ISS and have developed a quality system that goes with it that mimics what researchers on the Earth, terrestrial commercial researchers, follow for regulated products. And for anything that goes into an animal or a consumer, it goes through a regulated process. So that's Rhodium Scientific is proud to have that first process and implementing it currently on the space station right now. With that, we like to do business at the speed of business. So we like to launch our flights at the speed of business because biotech companies are bought and sold. They have exit plans in 3 to 5 years. And right now that's the traditional launch cadence. And with the commercial market coming online, we can't afford to wait 3 to 5 years for one experiment to go up. We need grad students to graduate. We need papers to be published. So scientists continue iterating and learning off of what we've already done in space with reproducibility that can be done over and over again to produce a commercial product and that return on investment to investors. So right now, Rhodium is the preferred science client for the Department of Defense. For the last 5 years, we've been flying Department of Defense science and technology aboard the International Space Station. And if anyone knows about, DoD, they really do de-risk products and technologies before they go to market. So a lot of our payloads have been de-risked. The prototype processes that we put in place for putting the QC in place for biotech missions have been de-risked, have been vetted, and have been accepted by DoD. Recently, we were awarded a DARPA Biomanufacturing Award. So that goes proof to our track record and to our quality processes in space. But we are hitting the ground running, and we have a lot of biotech missions on anywhere from 1 to 3 missions on every launch vehicle for the next year. So I'm honored to be here and look forward to talking biotech and biomanufacturing.
Thank you, Olivia. And I think when I circle back to you, the audience, I can tell from some of the questions, will be interested in your sense of which of the experiments you're working on lend themselves to being productized and perhaps seeing a commercial market somewhere in the future. So thank you very much. Tom, you're on, sir.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the invitation, and thank you, Phil, for a great setup of the private citizen market in space. So a little context: Space Adventures flew Dennis Tito back in 2001. We most recently flew Yusaku Maezawa and Yozo in 2021. Most of our clients, or all of our clients, have flown on Soyuz. That's obviously, we're switching that at this point after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I also participated I was the PI on Space Adventures submission to NASA's commercialization of LEO study back in 2018, where we took a very broad look at the overall marketplace, not just for private citizens, but we partnered with Made in Space and other companies as well to look at the overall marketplace. So I have a little bit more context beyond just the private citizens. But to reinforce Phil's point, the private citizen market has long been known to be a very reachable market. It's very real, it's very liquid. There are, with the right conditions, you can turn from an inquiry to a flight now within 12 months. The problem with that at the moment is, or the continual problem with the private citizen market is it's very price sensitive. And that is a problem that has yet to be solved. So while there were a decent number of private citizens who have flown to space in the last few years, the price for flying is not helping to accelerate the rate of flight. And that's becoming, I think, more of a problem rather than less. And that has there's two elements to that. One thing that became very apparent through the study that I referenced back in 2018 is there are really two primary components to the cost of a private citizen flying to space. One is the launch cost, and the other is the accommodation. Think of it as of any vacation you've ever planned. You've got to plan your flight, plus you've got to plan your hotel. The cost of launch is so high, there's very little left over in anybody's budget to pay for the accommodation. And if you're putting it in the context of these commercial LEO destinations, the destination needs to get paid and the launch provider needs to get paid. And to say launch cost has to come down in order to even create that room within the budget for the LEO destination to get paid. And the second issue, as far as private citizens are concerned, is their short-term stay. It's a week, 10 days, 2 weeks maybe. So you've got all of that launch cost, a little bit of money that can be spent on the destination. as opposed to the government astronauts who typically are going to want to go up for multi-months, 6 months, potentially a year at a time. And the destinations are able to charge significantly more for that human time on station. So the private market, within the context of the overall revenue stream potential for a commercial LEO destination, is relatively small at the moment. I think it has a significant opportunity if that launch cost can come down. Then we can get flight frequency up, because there is demand within the marketplace for sure, just not at the price points that we're currently at. So that's my quick introduction, my first few thoughts.
Terrific, Tom. When I circle back, I'd be interested in your views on how much of a reduction in price are we talking about. By the way, the role of insurance too, I presume that also is important, right? For insurance.
It is at the moment. It's not a significant percentage of the overall experience price.
That's super. Thank you so much. Least but not least, our good friend Andrew Rush. Andrew.
Thanks, Courtney. And as the other panelists have said, thank you for kind of putting this on and allowing us to, have these great conversations. Your intro did a wonderful job, but just to reiterate, I was a founder and CEO of Made in Space, and we had the pleasure of partnering with NASA to be the first folks to manufacture functional objects off the face of the planet, developing 3D printing technologies that worked in microgravity, which is a technology that is truly transformational, right? Like, if we think about how much we contingency plan for space operations, how many spares we bring with us or want to bring with us, but don't have the mass budget for, manufacturing on orbit in real time is something that lets us make much more resilient and safe and adaptable missions, activities, stations. That technology is also really was a springboard for us to get into pathfinding space and the manufacturing, processing of space-enabled materials. The way that we make anything of value on Earth is generally we either find it in the ground or we take something we found and we subject it to an unusual environment. And space is an unusual environment. And so there's plenty of things that we know from the decades of research that NASA and others have done that microgravity can enhance. And we all, not just Made in Space and Redwire, but Rhodium Scientific and many, many other organizations are, we're sticking our toes in that water and finding these things that, provide value that either at current launch operation return costs, and Tom did a great job talking about that from the human perspective, or maybe at lower price points in the future. And that's really, but I want to emphasize that we're in that sticking our toes in the water portion, or a kiddie pool portion, however you want to phrase it. But that is something where we're going to find some really amazing value. And all of this would not have been possible without the foresight and the investment that NASA has made, right? Like, talking about a vibrant low Earth orbit economy, commercial space stations, where it's not just folks that have the right stuff doing great things, but it's free enterprise expanding humanity's reach and utilization. We built the ISS, the commercialization of launch and return, like the commercial cargo and commercial crew programs have not only given us, price certain, though maybe a little higher than we would like, delivery of people to space. But it also has given us, it's dramatically lowered launch costs via the introduction of, a couple of different launch vehicles. And it's given us, things like Starlink, right? Like which I'm talking to you all using right now. And that's, and those things, these are great, positive feedback loops that NASA has enabled. But of course, giving private citizens, giving businesses access to these things has been essential. So the creation of the ISS National Lab, which CASIS does a good job in administering, that was a real game changer to allow folks to, to sort of crawl, walk, run The work that we did at Made in Space to demonstrate additive manufacturing and microgravity would have cost an order of magnitude more money to accomplish, if not more, if not for the ISS commercial cargo, the creation of the ISS National Lab. And so that is a return on investment for all of us in that lowering the cost of entry and lowering the cost of play. And then, now we're seeing NASA fund, kind of pilot payloads, right, in biotech and in manufacturing and these things, so we can find those things that may one day grow into pillars alongside human space flight and activity on these space stations. I'm a big believer that I actually don't think there's a killer app for commercial space stations. I think that a commercial space station or LEO economy, however you want to frame it, has at least 4 pillars, right? We have the activity of governments, right? The research and space exploration and preparation for space exploration that occurs and that occurs now. We have commercial research, which we're seeing more and more of, but it's critical that we operate on the same timescales as our terrestrial counterparts. If a contract resource organization can process 1,000 assays in a week and get that data going and do all that in less than a month, we need to be able to do that in space for space to actually be a part of the conversation. It's the same thing on the manufacturing side. Obviously, manufacturing processing, I think, is going to be a big pillar. But Phil and Tom are absolutely right. Like we have a market, and it's called human experiences. So private citizens go into space, via commercial ways, and sometimes that has kind of fallen a little bit out of vogue. But I think that's a really, really critical thing, and we'll see that be really important. And all of those things, of course, tie to things like even parabolic flights on the Earth and how we tie all those things together and nice pathways to success. And the final thought I'll end on is this: that what we're talking about here, there's incredible investment, and we're starting to we're reaping the benefits more and more and more. And I do think we will see vibrant, profitable commercial space stations, by the close of this decade. We have to be careful about how we spread our seed corn across them, because business models need a certain amount of base revenue to succeed. But we all need to recognize that what we're doing in LEO is in a virtuous cycle with deeper space exploration. That the more activity we have in low Earth orbit, we lower launch costs, we lower the cost of operation for everybody. And so the things that are happening, with Artemis, which is wonderful and amazing, are synergistic and in a virtuous cycle with the things that we're doing in low Earth orbit, including on the commercial side. So, Courtney, back to you.
Andrew, that was fabulous. And I thank all of you for introductory comments, just spot on. Andrew, I'm going to be your agent for a moment. I know it's uncomfortable to self-promote, but I so love the TED Talk you gave. And I'll tease by telling people, if you want to know what the now frontier is all about, you've got to listen to this. So do you mind putting in the chat
certainly
link?
Yeah, certainly. If you want to
I'm
drop
the one
that in.
asking, so you don't have to feel
no, Courtney, I appreciate that.
When I do circle back to you, I'd like to get your insight into how the additive technology and whatever else you see is indeed transforming how we approach space. As you and I discussed briefly the other day, we've all grown up building the system, spacecraft, whatever it may be, the payload here on Earth, and then brute forcing it, up partially through the gravity well. Being able to take elements, components, and so forth, materials, and to build and in space itself, of course, has huge implications. And I'd be interested as I circle back to you, Andrew, to get some thoughts on where that is, because that's a true paradigm shift. So thank you, Phil. I've had a couple of questions have to do with transition on the ISS. So let's see if we can't discuss that for a moment. There was some discussion at the satellite conference last week. In your FY24 budget, you were requesting X number of dollars for a deorbit tug for the International Space Station. leading some people in industry to say that they would like to see the agency invest in some recycle or repurposing of the space station elements rather than deorbiting en masse. And their feeling was that might in itself help promote an in-space economy. I wonder if what are your thoughts about the transition? Again, knowing that you're speaking for Phil McAllister, but just your observations about how to approach the transition and vis-a-vis the commercial habitats and so forth. So,
yeah, so I've actually sensed a lot of chatter about potentially repurposing the ISS or doing other things with the ISS, and we've been hearing that at NASA also. So that we did. If you go to my LinkedIn page, I do have a link to a NASA ISS transition frequently asked questions page, and a lot of those questions have to do with, well, why can't you repurpose the ISS or reuse parts of it? I'll try to answer that in a nutshell. Obviously, I can go on and on at length, as you saw from my introductory.
No, it was, please. I'm so glad you did that. Could you provide that link, if you don't mind, in the chat at some point? All right, go ahead, Phil, sir.
I would say in a nutshell, the ISS was not meant to be disassembled. We have had many spacewalks to assemble the space station, and it's not like a Lego where you can just detach it and have it operate. It needs to be an integrated system, and pulling apart one module with no control, no comm, potentially the comm might be over here, your propulsion module may be over there. It just doesn't make sense. And also, one of the reasons why we are retiring the space station is because it's getting close to its expiration date. It makes a lot more sense to start with a brand new station. You wouldn't want to take out the transmission from your old 20-year-old Chevy and put it into your brand new car where everything else is new. That just it fundamentally doesn't make sense. So it's not practical from a technical standpoint. It's really not practical from a dollar standpoint either. A lot of people have talked about maybe boosting it to a graveyard orbit or an orbit that would be easier to maintain. Boosting the International Space Station is not a trivial thing. We looked at it. It looks like it would take 8 to 20 progresses to boost it up to an orbit, and it would still be subject to drag from the upper atmosphere. It could still get a micrometeoroid strike or something else. A battery could blow up after 30 years and would not be safe. It needs to have a controlled reentry into a place where we know it's not inhabited. That's the most practical thing. Just having it sit up there, it's not like it sits up there and everything's static. Low Earth orbit is a dynamic environment, and the space station, as large as it is and as old as it is, it really just was not practical financially, technically, or even policy-wise to spend the money to keep that up there. Instead, we decided to go a different route, brand new, got all the nice features, better safety belts, cup holders, and safety features and technology, and geared around the markets that we really think are going to be commercially viable in the future. The space station was not built with that in mind at all. It's not the kind of thing that you would build to be a commercially viable spacecraft. So with that, I'll stop.
That useful. Just one more, if I may. Are there any components, microscopes, other things that might lend themselves to Olivia's work, for example, she and her peers, that might be salvageable?
We're hearing a lot of interest on that, Courtney. There's not only lab support equipment, but there's large racks of facilities, glove boxes,
it just goes on and on. Yeah,
the list goes on. I mean, it's packed. I mean, the ISX packed full of that stuff. You just look at a picture and it's like all over the place. Bringing it back down and then bringing it back up again is exceedingly expensive. Our down mass is extremely constrained right now to just the Dragon. And while it's possible, a lot of the stuff on ISS is old. We built a lot of those facilities 20 years ago. So you really got to sort of look at it on a case-by-case basis. We have not ruled out bringing facilities and some stuff that's up there that we know works down and putting it onto a CLD. You could potentially move it over to the Axiom station. When the Axiom station attaches, that'd be very easy in the short term. And we're calling that the messy middle. In the middle, when we got payloads, trying to figure out, do we put this on a CLD or do you put it on ISS? Once we get CLDs, it's easy. It's going on CLDs. Today, It's going on ISS. There is going to be this messy middle where we sort of figure out individually, case by case, what makes sense to bring down, what makes sense to move over, rather than remanufacture. And I think we're just going to have to take that on a case by case basis, Courtney.
To your point, Phil, analyzing things on a case by case basis, that's where you really do need the scientific and technical experts to say, is this piece of hardware something the biotech community even wants?
Yep.
It's a one-off piece of hardware that you can't do any ground controls in, or you can't replicate any studies, and there's no replicated studies and protocols using it before. Even though it's useful to other space stations, it's not useful to the Earth biotech community. And so having a liaison, like, we work and we help advise CLDs and other private companies on what is the equipment that they need to start looking at. I mean, with the emergence of COTS, commercial off-the-shelf equipment modified for spaceflight, that's a more realistic approach to outfitting the CLDs, because it's laboratory hardware scientists are already using. They already have baseline data sets within them, and they trust the performance of the vendor who created them. They're worldwide Fortune 500 companies who are specifically designing mass specs, or specifically designing incubators, or specifically designing microscopes, you name it. This is their job on Earth, and they've made a fortune doing it. So in my line of work with biotech industry, I'd much prefer and rather engage the type of industries on Earth to modify what's already working, what's already being used in commercial laboratories and research laboratories, and outfit it for spaceflight. And that's currently what we're doing.
I appreciate that. And Olivia, stay on, because I want to follow up with you. We know our community well enough that I can guarantee you that there are space entrepreneurs that are sitting there and agitated and see all sorts of opportunities. So Phil, as well as I do that you'll probably have no shortage of people knocking on the door, but with their ideas to salvage the ISS. But Olivia, thank you for that. Olivia, I wonder if you could just take a shot at what you see as products that might well have a market. And I'll remind those in our audience that maybe don't go back as far as a number of us, that when Johnson & Johnson was flying its electrophoresis experiments on the shuttle way back in the 80s, what they found was that it was very, very beneficial, but it was beneficial to their manufacturing process on Earth. The microgravity was useful to isolate a number of variables, and that helped them on Earth. So more often than not, we're finding, right, that it actually helps, and that's wonderful. But in terms of a space-based enterprise, I'm just curious if you can give some thoughts to it to help the audience understand the opportunity.
Absolutely. And like you said, Courtney, it is a space to Earth business model and also a space to space business model. So for example, the mission we're flying right now with DARPA on the ISS, we have two products of interest: a vitamin A, which is a therapeutic, or produces beta carotene, which is good for long-term space travel because you don't have to grow carrots in space. It takes up footprint. It's not sustainable. So if we can biomanufacture the vitamin A to take the therapeutic while in space, that's beneficial to space travelers, but it's also beneficial on production lines and synthetic biology lines, genetic engineering lines in a laboratory to produce at a higher ROI, a higher yield, efficiency yield of that therapeutic that enhances their manufacturing lines on Earth. The second one that we're flying right now, it's currently in orbit, is a polyhydroxybutyrate, PHB. It's a plastic that goes into 3D printers. And so that is useful, and Andrew will really like this. He has, Made in Space has a 3D printer, but instead of taking up the coils of plastic, we can now take up, and what Rhodium is producing with DARPA and University of Florida is a vial that produces the plastic strains that feeds directly into that 3D manufacturer on either in orbit or back on space. So it's about finding efficiencies and lessening the cargo, lessening the load, because launch costs are expensive, and the less cargo, the less cost per kilogram.
Fantastic. And I see in the Heath Mills, I think, is that on your staff, has just put in the chat a press release or some sort of announcement I would assume related to that topic. That's actually very exciting. That's an example, I think, of the type of synergy that we're just beginning to see in this, if you allow the phrase, ecosystem that's fits and starts beginning to evolve. That's exciting. Thank you, Olivia. I have a couple more, and then we're going to shift to, we have a very robust list of questions and comments in the chat, and we're coming up on the top of the hour, so I want to make sure that we give our audience an opportunity. But I want to get to Tom, if I may. If you have that proverbial Harry Potter wand in terms of launch cost, or that price elasticity, if you get to what would be the sort of the threshold that would, in your judgment, open up more opportunity among your customers?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question,
Yeah.
isn't it, really. So it's, you know, a magic wand is, you know, I think as Phil pointed out from his study going back to the, going back to 2003, there are plenty of wealthy individuals who can afford, a flight that is, $1 to $5 million for an experience. There's countless of them, but you're getting then a much larger volume and a much less personalized experience at that sort of price level. So but I don't think it's particularly helpful talking about something that is really unattainable at this point. I know there are ambitions. SpaceX have come out and said that Starship, once it's flying regularly, you can expect tickets to be in this price range, which is wonderful and great and aspirational. But for, SpaceX has been talking about reducing launch costs for a decade. They did when they first came onto the market, but it's barely shifted since then. I don't think. I mean, inflation, if you account for it, then probably yes, the real cost of a launch has come down. But over the course of a decade, it's barely shifted. I think what we just need to get to is, rather than the price going up, we need to have the price starting to come down again. That's when you can start to see the market really change, right? What the final destination is doesn't matter, but let's stop the price going up. Because as a customer, do you ever want to knowingly be the guy or girl who paid the most for a flight, or for anything for that matter, whether it's a car, a phone, or anything?
Right.
There is a certain premium that people will attach to being like the early adopter or the first or the innovator, and they're prepared to sort of write that off as part of the overall experience and part of the story that they can then tell, that they were part of that initial early adopter program. So there is a market. There are people who are prepared to pay incrementally more, but it's not a big market. And so we just need to start having the price, taking a slightly different trajectory, and then we can start to see a big
holy grail of our community, getting that price trend line going down. Andrew, I want to circle back, and then we're going to open up the audience. Transformation, right? So being able, per the earlier question I posed to you, to bring up materials, components, and then assemble in space. Implications?
Yeah. So the ISS is actually the great example of the power of in-space assembly of space assets, right? Like, there's no way, we don't have the launch capacity, and Starship won't even give us the launch capacity to put up something the size of a football field, and that's how big the ISS is. But we assembled it on orbit robotically. So the ISS is proof point number one of the transformational ability of building things in space. Certainly the work that we've done, and many others have done in this area, in looking at satellites and saying, hey, if we apply manufacturing and 3D printing and assembly to satellites, how much more capability can we get? And what we've seen and what we've worked on, and there are two programs at NASA, OSAM-1 and OSAM-2, that are going to demonstrate this on orbit, is that we think we can get 5 or 10 times more power, 5 or 10 times bigger apertures out of satellites, than the state of the art. And that means that means that we can get more bang for our buck, right? It means if I can put more power on a small sat, and that satellite isn't power constrained anymore. And most small satellites are power constrained. Like the OneWeb satellites operate like 500 watts or something like that, which is like it's amazing they can do anything with that. And meanwhile, our large telecommunication birds that are that operate in MEO and GEO, they're in like the kilowatts kind of range. So if you can bring multi kilowatts of power on one asset, if you can build very large apertures on those assets, you can do a lot with a little, or you can do absolutely amazing things. And manufacturing in space is also really, really transformational for in the now for human spaceflight, for commercial space stations. It's something that, and for programs like Artemis, it's something that I'm very, very passionate about, and seeing the adoption, like the just baseline adoption of 3D printing, robotic assembly, recycling technologies on these missions, because we've already seen, we saw in Apollo 13 that what do you do when you don't have the fix? Well, you can either kludge it together. They kludged it together. They had to, but if you have that kind of technology, you just have a digital catalog and make a part to fix, or phone home and say, hey guys, can you design something and send it to my printer so that we can continue the mission or take advantage of this unique scientific opportunity. And that's a small step, and that small step then leads to biomanufacturing, 3D printing filament on orbit, that we use that and we get even more efficient. Yeah. But we have to take that first step in baselining these things.
Yeah.
And then we can take and then like every journey, we can take the next step.
Huge. Thank you. Yeah. Literally the imagination is the limit. I think I see Charlie Walker with a question. If it's the right Charlie Walker, it's the one that I think went up on the shuttle back, broke the mold in terms of private civilian researchers going up to space. And I don't know if we can, Cody, can you hear me? Whether we could get Charlie on the video?
Hey Charlie, Steve Wolf here. If you want to turn on your camera and your mic, we'd love to hear from you directly.
Yeah, it'd be a real honor to have you on for a moment. And
can you hear me? I can do so.
Yeah, we hear you.
Did you bring back such fond memories? Thank you for joining us.
I'm on board.
Well, it's an honor to have you. So you've had talk about hard-earned experience up there. So you want to provide your very eloquent comment, please.
Well, everybody could see it on chat. I don't want to spend more time to take up time from the appointed and approved presenters, including yourself. Please. Just to say that since you introduced the point in a brief comment, Courtney, I just wanted to chime in to say that yes, terrestrial fallout of the technologies that we demonstrated in orbit for pharmaceutical and medical materials, both in solution and suspension, purification in microgravity, the terrestrial 1G fallout of those technologies was of benefit, although the demonstrated benefits that I have seen in public papers and presentations is still an order of magnitude or more less than the proven on orbit in our demonstration flights on shuttle, our proven on orbit improvements to the productivity and the purification quality of materials taken to space and purified there by this electrophoretic process. There were orders of magnitude improvement with that process in low G over what technologies even that I see today in use on the ground. I mean, gravity, the way you get rid of that gravity factor in the basic equations of those processes is to leave gravity behind.
Yeah.
So there's basic limitations of operating here on Earth that we demonstrated we can overcome by taking those processes into low G. The limiting factor and the killer for our prototypical business pursuit was number one, the cost of access to space, the frequency of access to space, and the frequency of return of productive produced materials to the Earth, and competitive technologies created pressures that the prior two conditions just added all up to a death knell for the business as we were pursuing it at the time.
At the time, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's wonderful to see you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Steve, for the continuation of these episodes. So thanks very much. Over and out to you guys.
All right. If you allow me, just in the interest of time, I want to try to get as many questions in. There's a question, and everybody forgive me for pronunciations, from Gene Mikulka. And his question for you, Phil, how will the transition from the International Space Station to commercial stations work with our international partners, given that obviously some of their own modules are on the ISS? So over to you, Phil.
Yeah, ideally, we would like the other countries to purchase services directly from the commercial providers, just like NASA's going to do. We really don't want to be in the position of bartering hardware for spaceflight opportunities. We don't even see really how we could do that, right? Each one of the companies has their own configuration and architecture. And so we, NASA, can't say, hey, go use this module. That's not consistent with our strategy. They have to figure out the spacecraft that works for their business case. And so we probably are not going to, at this point, we haven't figured out a way how NASA would be necessarily in the middle of that business arrangement. We haven't ruled it out. We're still talking about it. But I think our preference would be on a nominal basis that the companies would engage with business-to-business relationships as well as business-to-government, being non-US government agencies or what have you.
Phil, thank you. And then we have from Offworld Inc., what impact has NASA's price increase to use the space station had on use of the public use of the station? Price increase?
Yeah. When we first introduced the pricing policy for using ISS resources, we had a very large subsidy. Our stakeholders in Congress and elsewhere did not like that. So we phased that out about 2 years ago, and we have seen a noticeable decline in the number of proposals for use of the ISS for commercial and marketing purposes. I don't have exact numbers, but it was a pretty strong disincentive to have to pay full reimbursement cost for NASA's costs. That doesn't necessarily mean these things aren't viable businesses or markets. It wasn't a viable business market paying the rate at which we had to charge for full reimbursement of the ISS, which we all know is not a commercial business spacecraft. So while you might say, oh, well, that just proves the point, there's really no markets. No, it proves that there aren't many markets at the price point that we had to charge full cost reimbursement to use the International Space Station.
That's great. Thank you. And I must say that there's some really astute comments, observations made in the chat room. And Steve, I'm hoping we can inventory and not lose those, when we go off the video. So if there's some way you and Cody can capture them, that'd be great. Lucy Lowe makes an interesting and I think a profound point, Olivia. She says that the question regarding value of basic and applied scientific research in general as in space, research builds on itself by providing results and suggesting more questions over many years. That whole body of research is what, let me get it right here, underpins advances in R&D for technology manufacturing. So it's not like a specific research project or program, such as Charlie Walker was mentioning, will necessarily lead to a commercial product. Many thousands of experiments over time, over decades, can lead to a product. So if you want to address that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I'll address it first, and a quick go back on the cost of how you can scale the market and how the market should be thinking about scaling. When you change the story of return on investment, when you change the product, and you start looking at what are the target markets that are able to scale in terms of return on investment, you have to think, if you're sending commercial astronauts or tourists, what is the ROI back to scale it that's more than experiential. If you're sending cargo, what is the ROI that can be returned back to Earth that would improve the ROI on an actual product that can be tangible and scalable? And so what Lucy's talking about in terms of fundamental research and projects and laying the baseline is having the baseline for all these fundamental studies, because every product we have, every therapeutic, every pharmaceutical, everything we consume has been conducted and tested under gravitational conditions. And when you remove gravity, those products are more likely to change. And so I think there's a plethora of biology, chemistry, genetic engineering, pharmaceuticals, physics, of all angles that you can retest over and over and over in space and get a different result. Some for the better, some for the good. The better, like with Charlie, his example about pharmaceuticals having better efficacy and better homogenized crystallization in space. That is very, very true. But we have to get better, and the CLDs have to keep in mind the return cadence of these samples, because not everything can be done through AI. AI will help in determining models and modeling for what potential ROI could be, but we do have to bring the sample back because it is an actual product that needs to be basically reverse engineered and scaled on Earth.
That's great. Thank you. And I want to thank Roger Weiss. He's provided a number of very interesting links for further information on LEO economy in the chat. So if you're interested, please check that out. And a few others have also offered additional links. Here from Michael Maloney, he said, we've read for decades about the amazing science being done in space, not to downplay the work being done, but it appears that knowledge has been the only deliverable to date. And I would suggest that's not a bad service unto itself. But what are the top 3 commercial products in your judgments to be sold on Earth? He's saying to sell on Earth, and we can expect to be delivered from these commercial space stations, and when, and do we know? So I Olivia sent you on camera, but I'm going to ask others as well. What's your
so we're focusing at Rhodium specifically laser focused on biomanufacturing, regenerative medicine, and bioprospecting, aka drug discovery. We have done a lot of market research analysis in those 3 areas, and we have a long client list of, if we lower the price, how can we have unique business arrangements to test your products that are Earth-based products, and then you get to see that novel change from microgravity. Would this help increase your ROI on Earth? And from every one of them, they've said yes. So biomanufacturing, regenerative medicine, and drug discovery.
Great. Pam, you want to respond, and then Andrew?
The overriding conclusion that I came to with the 2018 study, that all of these different markets, whether it's manufacturing or research or tourists or governments, it's all driven by the same factor, and that is the cost of launch and cost of return. One of the questions that came in earlier is, and I think it's a little bit of the elephant in the room, is what does happen to these commercial stations when Starship comes into play?
Right.
If they're able to launch the mass that they're talking about at the price that they're talking about, I think it changes the whole paradigm for the design of the space station. Olivia was referencing earlier the importance of cost per kilogram and being able to do things in very small spaces, but also also advocating for the commercial off-the-shelf research tools. Imagine a world in which you can just take one of these commercial labs and essentially rebuild it in a Starship, launch it up for a few weeks or a few months with scientists, and you're bringing it down, and you're doing that all for a few $1 million rather than a few $100 million. That changes the paradigm for so many different businesses. And the problem we have at the moment with, as much as I respect and appreciate the efforts that NASA is doing with the CLDs, it's a little bit of a solution that is looking for a problem, and it just doesn't fit given the cost structure for owning and operating those space stations. It's just a very, very difficult nut to crack. And there's tremendous amount of primary research that's done about the efficacy of of certain things that are being done in space and potentially have applications on Earth. I know Andrew has experienced this at Made in Space, some really interesting novel concepts and materials that can be made, but it just doesn't make sense to do them in space yet. And it's the big yet. They will make sense, they will be able to derive benefits, but it's when that cost to benefit ratio is more in proportion, and we're just not there yet, sadly. And I don't want to be sort of the negative Nancy in the room but it's the reality of how business decisions are made.
Exactly right.
It's wonderful having governments that are advocating and supporting for this, and that's why NASA is doing it's taken a long time to get here, but now they're doing a tremendous job. They're creating this platform, and they're opening up these different opportunities. It's just really unfortunate that the cost structure is way out of whack.
Yeah.
That this whole notion of NASA being one of many customers is a bit of a pipe dream, because there are no other customers at this price point. It doesn't make sense. Who's the investor who's actually going to put their money in at these price points? Price comes down, cost of launch comes down, then you start to get an influx of investors trying to do something that's new and novel and different. But it's so hard to close a business case at the moment.
Gotcha. If I may, just for the audience, Andrew, a couple of comments. Phil, certainly I'll let you provide some comment. And then I want to allow Dr. Mike Roberts a couple of minutes, and then shift it over to Steve Wolf to exit out. So with that, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Tom, I think I as usual, I love where you're going. And I think there's a couple of thoughts. One is I think there's an untested assumption that we've been making as a collective for a while, with that NASA being one of many customers phrase. Is I don't read that phrase to say that there are customers that NASA is one of many customers that are the same size.
Yeah.
I just view that as there are other folks doing it. And I think that's a really important distinction, because absent a $1 billion order for Olivia for CAR T cells from someone, we're like, it's going to take us a while to for any of these things to get anywhere close to what NASA spends. But the good news is we don't have to get there. Like we're, like we have a long, many innings to play to grow this. And to grow this vibrant LEO economy. I think the comments about Starship are really insightful, but I think that we need to recognize that it's always cheaper, like terrestrially. Why do we have like industrial parks? Well, we invest a bunch of money in CapEx, we put a bunch of facilities and equipment there, and then we like transport goods to and from those places. And I think CLDs, if they can make themselves Starship compatible and have materials and hardware come and be utilized, I think that business model is going to crush, a CLD that uses a smaller launch vehicle. It's going to crush a business model that's just load up a CRO inside of a Starship and send that to space. The business model, it's like, hey, we built a CRO in space, and Starship comes up and has a high volume of a high visit rate. That's going to be how this is truly going to impact. Now, we've all seen, I think the space industry still has not fully integrated what it meant that SpaceX dropped the cost of launch so much. We still haven't fully integrated the high availability of rideshare for small satellites. Like I can send a couple 100-kilogram satellite to space now for $2 million if it's a rideshare. And I don't think people really have like fully grokked that, fully wrapped their hands around that. And we're going to see the same thing with Starship. I think we're seeing the same thing with Starship. But it's certainly an exciting time. And maybe just to give my 2 cents on the original question, I think commercial research in space, doing drug assays and drug development, that's going to be a big one. I really think that things like CAR T cells are super cool and interesting to do manufacturing. And I think we're going to see something like a Z-bland or an optical crystal or fiber that has an extremely high price point per kilogram find a market on the earth today, because their markets at the current price points are closed. Is it $1 billion a year? Maybe, maybe not. Is it $1 trillion a year? No. Does it need to be that big? No. And that's, but this is, I think we're in a stage where we're going to hit a lot of base hits, because that's how you get around the bases.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. And Phil, I hate to do this to you, maybe a minute or so, and then I've got to turn it over to Dr. Roberts, but just so NASA, you're not taken in vain. So please, your sense of NASA among many customers, please.
Yeah, actually, I don't disagree with anything Tom said. I totally fundamentally agree with it. I have a slightly different perspective, although like I would say that 3 years ago, you could not buy a ticket to space from a commercial company on a commercial spacecraft at any price. So it went from infinite to about $50 million per seat. That's pretty good. But I totally agree that that's still super high, and would love to see it come down. And think that it can and hopefully will. The thing about one of many customers, and Andrew sort of alluded to it a little bit, is that I have a policy objective that says continuous human presence. We are going to have people up there being able to live and operate and work in space. They are going to have, that provides excess capacity. At what price they sell that excess capacity, we'll see. The market can determine that, but the government is really, I don't want them charging the outrageous prices, so don't take these comments too far, but we're relatively insensitive price. I've got a mission, just like Department of Defense. I got a mission, and I'm going to pay what it costs to get that mission done. That's going to inherently give excess capacity to do all these other things that Olivia's talking about, which are super cool, and Andrew and everybody else. And so I think there's a way that can work along the lines of what Andrew said. It's not all these customers have to be equal, but it gives you a place where everybody can do a lot of things. Just like we created these commercial crew capabilities, there has excess capacity. They can sell these Dragons to others at a particularly cheaper price. And then one last comment, I'll shut up.
Go ahead, please.
The Starship, I would say all the CLD providers that we talk to are acutely aware of Starship's disruptive capability and are watching that with bated breath, as we all are, to see how it plays out. And I think that's one of the strengths of our strategy, is that we are not making the big bet until the middle part of this decade. We should see kind of how SpaceX kind of shakes out with Starship, whether it really is disruptive, and we can incorporate that into our acquisition strategy. So hopefully, the strategy will be flexible enough to accommodate a disruptive force like Starship.
And I'll make a final comment, which is you have a very, very powerful carrot and stick with your budget and funding for these habitats, in terms of continually reminding them about the importance of not just depending on the NASA or the government funding sources. So appreciate your efforts in that regard. Thank you all. And now, if I may call on Dr. Roberts. Thank you for your patience. We thank you for your organization's wonderful sponsorship, and obviously your great work vis-a-vis the station. If I could ask you just for a minute or two, just for some overall comments, and then I'll turn it over to Steve. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Certainly, I'll keep it to a minute. Courtney, first, I want to thank you and Beyond Earth Institute for creating this forum and providing this opportunity. This today's session, as many of these are, is extremely enlightening for us at ISS National Lab. And I would in part echo the comments you just heard from Tom and Andrew and Phil as well, that we're at a unique point in American history in time right now. And the International Space Station, is still fully open for business. So we have an opportunity now in the seven or so years of its remaining life to de-risk a lot of the market analyses that are going to require us to identify what that killer app is going to be. Admittedly, none of us knows, I think, right now what that killer app is going to be, but we have enough history of compelling research from the fundamental end of the spectrum all the way to the use inspired to start making some bets, as Olivia mentioned in their market analysis. So we have time now to not only pursue those potential new markets with manufacturing in space. The service providers and the people building the platforms have the opportunity to identify where their markets are going to exist, who their partners are going to be, and how best to accommodate the needs of this new marketplace. So we are going to continue in partnership with NASA to fully utilize the capabilities on board the station and understand that in the very near future, we're going to start to transition those capabilities to these commercial LEO destinations that have really unexplored capabilities. They're building them now, they're designing them now, but their full potential is not going to be realized until far in the future. So again, thanks for the opportunity to participate.
Yeah, perfect set of observations to end on. I want to thank you all. It's been a real honor to be with you for the past hour and a half. We could easily go on for hours. I want to thank the Jim Plaxcos and others, Heather Mill, Heath Mills and others who've taken time to provide such great questions and comments and links. Sorry we couldn't get to all of you, but really appreciate it. With that, thank you. And Steve, it's back to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. That was an awesome session. I'll tell you a couple of takeaways. Tom's pragmatism and his realism in terms of the challenges that we're facing from the financing side. Olivia, you're already doing it. That's the cool thing. She's already doing it in terms of building those markets in biotech. So super cool. Andrew, you are part of space history right now in terms of what you've done with Made in Space, and we look forward to seeing a lot more of that in the future. Let me see, Andrew, Phil, what can I say? The biggest takeaway for me for the day is that the killer app is people, right? I can almost see you in this Charlton Heston type of moment here with killer app is people. So with that, thank you all again for and of course Phil, thank you again for being such a great advocate. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. That's it for today. This program, like all our programs, are located on a YouTube channel. Just look up the Beyond Earth Institute. We've got a couple of dozen programs on there, all fascinating projects. We'll see you back next month on April 26th. Look for the meeting input, and thank you again all for joining us, and thanks again to our speakers for outstanding program. Thank you, and have a great day.
Beyond Earth is committed to the true purpose of why we go to space. Join us on this journey.